Hi friends, it's Sarah. Welcome back. Welcome to my channel. I talk about sustainability here and also about living in France. So 2 months ago, I moved to a city called Angers in France to teach English as a language assistant in 2 primary schools. Today we're going to talk about the environmental impact of me moving abroad. Let's start from the actual move itself. So I took a plane from Sacramento to Los Angeles to Paris. This flight emitted 1.6 tons of CO2 equivalent. The original flight I booked actually was through Atlanta, so Sacramento to Atlanta to Paris. According to the calculations, it would have emitted 1.7 tons of CO2 equivalent. By flying more direct, my carbon impact was a bit less, so that's just a good tip for when you are taking a long-haul flight. The longer the flight itself and less layovers, the better. And on the flight itself, I had a vegetarian dinner, and I had compostable little forks and stuff from Air France, so that was kind of cool. They did have vegetarian options and I was able to eat that. For my luggage, I checked 1 suitcase and I shipped 1 suitcase to my current apartment where I am right now. My initial plan was to take the metro in from the airport to my hotel, but I was just absolutely exhausted and didn't think I could navigate it, so I opted for a taxi instead. And I chose to stay at a hotel instead of a hostel or an Airbnb because I, one, wanted a nice hot shower to myself in my own room, and 2, I try not to stay in Airbnbs in bigger cities because of the issues of gentrification and housing displacement that's caused. France actually does have a bit more strict laws around Airbnbs, so it's not quite as bad. My final transport to my city the next day after I stayed in the hotel in Paris was a train, and we love trains. The best option if you can ever do it. In making all these decisions, I had to balance the what am I most comfortable with and my anxiety levels and what's best for the planet, and I think I fell in between on most of the options. So I give myself a B+ environmental consciousness on my trip here. Next, let's get into the purchases that I made to get to France. First, I bought a new suitcase from the brand Monos, and I decided to go with this brand because they have an unlimited lifetime guarantee. If anything goes wrong with the suitcase, they'll go and they'll try to fix it or they'll replace it for you. And so I think that's a good company value to have. Also a member of 1% for the Planet and climate neutral certified. I definitely could have bought a secondhand suitcase, but I was a little worried about the durability of it, and I looked for about 2 months before deciding to buy a new one, and I just could not find anything that would withstand, you know, moving across country and being able to hold all the stuff that I needed to make the move. The second suitcase that I ended up shipping, I did get from Goodwill secondhand, like $15, but it's truly like an absolutely horrible suitcase, and I was like, I just need a box to get my stuff across the ocean. So it was fine for that, but for the actual suitcase that I'm going to be using over and over again, I opted to go with a new one. Where I'm living in France is a lot rainier and colder than I'm used to in California, so before I left, I knew that I needed to get some more jackets and boots and winter clothes, so all of that I ended up finding secondhand. And my last big purchase were these Bluetooth headphones, which again I got secondhand on eBay, and I saved quite a bit of money buying them that way. I wanted to get a really good product that would last, so instead of keep buying like really bad headphones, I didn't find any of the ones that were sustainably made were like to my taste, so I ended up going with these Sony Bluetooth that they're secondhand. They're rarely used at all, so why not? Also, it's really great when I'm in the kitchen because I have a communal kitchen and I can watch my embarrassing reality shows without being judged by all my neighbors and having them listen to English all the time, because I do feel quite bad about that. So, good purchase. Now let's get into what I bought on arrival in France. I think I did an okay job at this. I'd give myself a B- overall in the purchases that I made and the sustainability options. But if you go back and watch my other video, you know that I was like quite sick my first couple days here, and so that contributed to this like, I don't care, I'm just gonna have what I want and hopefully it'll make me feel better. So not giving myself an excuse, but I definitely was not in the mindset to be like, okay, let's do some mental calculations on sustainability in this French grocery store where my credit card's not even working. My apartment here came furnished, but there were a couple things that I still needed to get, so I had to buy a new pillow, a new pillowcase, and a towel. So as I settled in, I tried to buy as much secondhand stuff as possible, so everything from my kitchen, I got most of that secondhand, but there were a couple things that I just could not find. So I had to buy those new. And I'll make sure when I'm done living here, if I'm done living here, I will definitely make sure to donate those back. So it's kind of almost like I'm renting from the thrift store. I also had to buy cleaning supplies new because I don't know how you'd get that secondhand. So I tried to go with ones that said like eco or bio, like more sustainable, but I think I mentioned in my last video, like probably got a little greenwashed, and when I buy it the next round, I'll definitely look into it a bit more. When I cook for myself, I'm vegetarian. But at my residence, there's a restaurant on campus and we have to pay for 12 meals a month. And they just like truly do not have vegetarian options. So probably about like once a week, I've been eating fish, which I don't love. And I'm trying to plan it out a bit more. So like the rare occasion that they have a vegetarian option, I am there. I will buy that food with the money that I already have to pay. But I might bring it up with the residents, being like, hey, we love the planet, right? We can have more vegetarian options. So we'll see if I can figure out how to say that in French. If I were to move again, I definitely would bring more like kitchen basics. So I'd bring like forks and knives and spoons, and maybe just a couple of like a whisk and a wooden spoon, and definitely a bowl, because the first like week I was here, I was like frantically looking for a bowl that, okay, to be fair, I'm like a little picky on design. So I could have just bought like an ugly bowl, but I was like, no, I'm gonna find some cute vintage bowls at the thrift store. So I was truly just eating out of the one mug that I brought. So I think I would have packed a bit more of like Tupperware, kitchen utensils, so I didn't have to worry about it when I got here. Now that I've gone through all of my personal carbon footprint, let's get into more of the big picture items about the environmental impact of moving abroad. And not to negate my choice to move across the ocean, because obviously that does have a climate impact, but I do think it's important to look at the bigger picture of everything as well. The first big difference in living in the US versus living in France is I will not have a car while I'm here, whereas in the US I did own a car. So according to the EPA, an average car emits 4.6 tons of CO2 over a year. I had just a regular gas-powered car. Had I stayed in the US, I probably would have upgraded to a hybrid electric, like a little Prius or something, but that's still a huge chunk of impact that I just do not have here because I walk and I take the bus everywhere. The second big difference is the size of the apartment and the electricity mix. So in the US, I was living with my family, but I would have moved out into a regular studio apartment. But if you look at the energy breakdown of California versus France, California relies on 66% non-renewable energy and 34% renewable energy. And in contrast, 70% of France's energy comes from nuclear and less than 10% reliance on fossil fuels. So just by virtue of the building that I'm living in and my transportation choice, I'm able to live such a more sustainable life than I would be in the United States. Overall, if you compare the average carbon footprints per capita in France versus the US, the average French person contributes 4.97 tons of CO2 a year versus 16.59 tons of CO2 a year for the average American. Like, the most sustainable lifestyle that I could be living in California is still more carbon intensive than a person who like does not care about the environment and just like lives their life in France. I hope the little systems change, the light bulb is going off in your head right now, and how important it is to push our governments to make the changes to make it easier for us to live a more sustainable lifestyle. And the last piece I wanted to talk about in this video is travel. One of the main reasons I moved to France was to take advantage of the train system and be able to travel around the country on my breaks, because I have quite a few breaks being a teaching assistant. I have like a thing called workers' rights here, like I know a concept new for Americans. So every 6 weeks I have 2 weeks off to travel. For my first trip, you can see in my last video about the Pyrenees, I took trains around the south of France. And for the winter break, I'm going to be going to Lyon in the east of France, in Annecy. So again, that's just trains. And I'm thinking for the break after that would be the only break that I'll be maybe taking a plane to Portugal. The only other flying that I'll do, I think, is to see the Lord Queen herself, Ella, in concert in May, which I'm stoked for. And that'll be in Scotland, so I could take the train, we'll see. I haven't really planned out how that's gonna work yet. And truly, like, I do not like flying anyway, and I prefer train travel, so it's 100% the better option if you can choose to not take like a cheap flight somewhere, and you have the time to do it right. I plan to offset my travel, but not by way of carbon calculator. I just feel like it's not the best method. Is like when you feel guilty, you buy off your carbon debt. It seems just kind of silly to me. Every month for about 2 years, I've been donating to Amazon Watch, which is an organization that helps protect indigenous rights in the Amazon rainforest, which obviously is a huge sequester of carbon and just like an important thing to have on the earth. So I'm counting that as my carbon offset. I think it's better to consistently give money to a climate justice organization than to just buy off offsets when you feel guilty about traveling. There's also the aspect of just living here is so different than taking a 1-week trip just to come back to the US. So if my goal is to be able to travel and experience French culture, like I think it's the best way to be able to do that is to actually live here. In closing, am I a hypocrite? On this channel, I've talked a lot about travel, sustainability, and the personal life choices that we make and how to fight for climate justice. And when I was making the decision to move abroad, all of that was swirling in my mind. And when I came down to it, yes, I know that we have to fight for climate justice and it's so, so important, but I was just so burnt out on having to be like, hey, like, you know, I kind of want to be able to, you know, have a livable planet in 30 years. I'm not saying, JK, everything I've ever said is wrong, but I think it's a lot more nuanced than I had made in my previous videos about travel and sustainability. And while I really do want to work in the climate movement, this last year has just been burnout after burnout of working on wildfires at my previous job, and I just needed a break. And while I was sitting teleworking, doing stuff that I really enjoyed and that was impactful, I just could not shake this feeling of missing out on being 23. And maybe that's selfish, but I'm honestly just still not ready to get back to climate activism, and that's the truth. I'm gonna leave this video here on that kind of nuanced note. If you have any other things to add about your thoughts on living life while also being involved in climate activism, moving abroad, your experiences with that, I would love to know in the comments. So thank you friends for watching. I'll see you in the next one.